This book is weird. What's up, guys? My name is Moo. I'm a college student who loves reading, and I'm here to share that love with all of you. Now, I don't know how familiar a lot of you guys are with Arabian Nights. I feel like a lot of us Westerners, a lot of us Americans, really, when they think of Arabian Nights, think of like Aladdin, which, hot take, I liked the live action Aladdin. More boos? Are you joking? I thought it was good. Also, Naomi Scott, icon. She's so gone, on my playlist forever. But Aladdin is not a great depiction of the Arabian Nights. This, while not the 1001 Arabian Nights, is the actual Arabian Nights. And man, it's weird. I went into this really excited, and I didn't know what to expect. I obviously knew about Shahrazad and the 1001 Nights, and how she told stories to make sure that she stayed alive so the king didn't kill her. But besides that, I really knew nothing about it, and I was a little shocked, I will not lie. So before we get into that and all of my opinions, because I know that all of my opinions are what you want to hear, we're just going to get into the summary. So let's start with that. Shahrazad turned to King Sahariar. I'm so sorry. I will not be saying names much in this book. And said, "May I have your permission to tell a story?" He replied, "Yes." And Shahrazad was very happy and said, "Listen. The stories of Arabian Nights and stories within stories and stories within stories within stories, I will talk more on that later, are famously told in the voice of Shahrazad, under the threat of death should the king lose interest in her tale. Collected over centuries from India, Persia, and Arabia, and ranging from adventure fantasies, vivacious erotica, and animal fables that pointed to Sufi tales. These stories provided the daily entertainment of the medieval Islamic world at the height of its glory. No one knows exactly when a given story originated, and many circulated orally for centuries before being written down, but in the process of telling and retelling, they were modified to reflect the general life and customs of the Arab society that adapted them, a distinctive synthesis that marks the cultural and artistic history of Islam. This translation is of the complete text of the Mahdi edition, the definitive Arabic edition of a 14th century Syrian manuscript, which is the oldest surviving version of the tales and considered to be the most authentic. So, I did not read the summary, and that's on me, but the amount of violence, the amount of sex, the amount of racism, sexism, all of that threw me for a loop. I was flabbergasted. And you know, even after all of this, even after my lack of enjoyment, I'm still keeping this book in my library. There's some that I will give away right away because I disliked it so much. Like, there are books that I haven't reviewed on this channel because they were not worth my time. But this, I'm glad I read, you know? It's one of the most infamous collection of stories of all time, and I'm really glad I read it, and there were some very good things about it, but it was weird. Don't get me wrong, there were parts I enjoyed, and I also don't want to be like a white girl saying, "This thing from over there is weird," because that's obviously not the perspective I'm coming at. I'm coming at it from just a reader's perspective, and I understand that there are blind spots in my perspective, but I'm going to come at this speaking only of the content of the book and not the culture that it stems from, except to talk about the issues that I have with the treatment of certain groups of people in this book. Like, that's the only thing that I think has to do with the culture. The other stuff, just odd. Just odd. I just didn't expect this book to be so explicit, for example, and I wouldn't call myself a prude by any means, but I didn't expect it, so it was just a little bit jarring. That was just a part that I disliked, but that also is just a personal preference, so I'm not gonna say, "Ooh, erotica, objectively bad," because no. But I can't imagine how in present day it would make anyone feel like, ah. But I think that was like the least of my issues. The worst part was the treatment of women and the treatment of Black people. With the women, I expected it more, you know? A lot of societies back then were extremely patriarchal. Women were seen as property, women were bought and sold. That didn't surprise me to see in this story. Like, why would it, like, it's the type of thing where since you expect it and since it was a time of history, obviously looking back on it, yes, it is wrong, but it is part of history. So it's like, okay, well, I expect this. And for the sake of my enjoyment of the story, I'm going to read over it without like that much critical thought, because it's like, well, what am I supposed to do about it? It happened so many centuries ago, and are people still dealing with the after effects of it? Absolutely. There are still cultures where women are seen as objects to be bought and sold in this contemporary world, and that very much saddens me. However, since I expected it in this story, that was not the worst part for me. What was worse was how both Black slaves and hunchbacks were seen as both lesser and of like laughing points. Like the Arabian Nights, like in the book, would explicitly mention when a slave was Black, which I didn't really get the point of. Maybe it was important to differentiate back then, but I just thought that was really weird, because they would say, oh, a slave girl, oh, a slave, and here's a Black slave. Like, it was like othering them. Like, they're all slaves, they all have the same duties. To my knowledge, if I'm wrong, please correct me, I apologize. But they all had the same duties, so why were we like explicitly mentioning the color of a certain group's skin? There was a couple times where it was mentioned that there were also like very light-skinned slaves, like white slaves, but not often. More often than not, the mention of a Black slave was brought up so much, and it was disappointing to me. Because I think in my head, when I as an American think of racism, I think of white people being racist against Black people. And I guess in a society like that, where skin tone is so varied, like I understand that there's a beauty standard, but I expected them to be better, I guess. And I think it was disappointing that my expectation didn't meet the reality. I didn't expect them to be so overtly racist, but that's how it was, you know? That's how it was, and I learned a lot more through this book, I suppose. Another thing is, there are multiple stories about hunchbacks, and like, the entire joke was like, ha ha ha, they look weird. Ha 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 ha. Like, what do I even say to that? Like, it's just bad. What do I even say to that? Like the whole point of introducing a hunchback into the story is to go, ha ha ha, you're so silly, you have a birth defect. Crazy. Another thing was that I feel like this is a collection of stories told orally over an expanse of like many, many years, right? But the premise of the story, it starts out with the king being deceived by a woman. So he's like, okay, well, all women are terrible and deceitful and manipulative, so I'm going to marry a woman every single night and kill her the next morning. Which is like man-baby behavior. Check yourself. But beyond the point of that, he goes, all women are manipulative and deceitful and all that kind of stuff. And then Charizard comes in. She's an icon. Absolute icon. But also, she is manipulating the king. She is being cunning. She is being intelligent. Like, love that intelligent woman representation. And there were many times in this book where you could, like, tell that some of the storytellers thought of women as incredibly intelligent at the time as well, which is like always good to read about because women have always been really intelligent, just like men, you know. It's just a good reminder. You got it with the tale of Genji. You got it here. Like, there are bits and pieces where you see the true intelligence of women, even in that time when women's rights to education were not really given, were not really granted in a lot of ways. But also, on the contrary, you have a woman who is meeting with a king who believes all women are manipulative and deceitful, and she's manipulating and deceiving him in order to save her life and the lives of others, but she is, and she's also telling a ton of stories about other women deceiving men and like getting punished for it, which I just thought from a storytelling perspective was odd. And I know that Shahrazad is just the vessel for these stories to be told in a cohesive way, but I just found that so interesting. It's a woman telling a story about other deceitful women who get punished for their deceit. And so many stories as well are stories of someone, a lot of times it being a woman, going, hey, do this thing with me. And the main guy is like, heck yeah, I will, da 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 da. And then a lot of times for no reason, the person that leads them away is like, haha, now I'm gonna ruin your life because you decided to trust me. And I don't know, it was just weird for me. Like, I feel like there's a lot of value in telling stories about the importance of both trust and distrust of people. But the way that it was written was like a woman going, hey, random man on the street, I'm rich, sleep with me. And he's like, well, I guess I have to, and I will. And then they bring him to the house, and she's like, okay, take off your clothes. And he's like, okay, I will. And then she shaves off their eyebrows and their beards, which is incredibly, like, you have to have a beard at that time. It is, like, unheard of for men to be without beards in that time. And she, like, deceives him, shaves off his eyebrows and beards, and, like, he falls through a trap door into a market, bald and naked, and she was like, ha ha ha, I just did that because it was fun. And I'm sorry, like, maybe it's just, like, not knowing the culture well enough and not being in that time at the time, but to me, that just is such an absurd story. And it's like, I feel like there should be a reason behind why this lady did that. So why? What? But there's no reason. She's just like that. And there were multiple stories like that. Like, the stories were quite repetitive. And that was probably the least of my issues. But the stories were quite repetitive, and they were just quite violent and, like, overtly crude. And another thing, so many stories were just, and he took a sword and went, what? And its head got chopped off. And it's not the violence that bothered me. It was the, can they do that? I thought it was hard to decapitate someone. Can they do that? So there's that too. But I don't want to be completely negative. I don't think this book was all bad. There were stories I really enjoyed. There were stories of, like, forbidden lovers who, like, couldn't be together and were so upset that they couldn't be together that they, like, both perished around the same time. And I thought that was, like, a tragic love story, very akin to Romeo and Juliet, but it was told before Romeo and Juliet even existed. And I liked stories more like that than I did, like, the deceitful ones and the ones about, like, money and gold and women and all that kind of thing. And I think my favorite one was about a princess of the sea getting sold to a king of the land and them falling in love, and they had a son and all that kind of thing. And it was still, like, there were still things that I found quite problematic with that story in, like, 2025 hindsight, but that was probably my favorite one. It's near the end, so it was a really good pick-me-up, and it was really, like, you didn't DNF, good for you, like, throw you a bone. But that was probably my favorite one. I found it incredibly wholesome despite the things that, like, in 2025 hindsight, I'm like, oh, problematic, but again, it's like things that you just need to look past in order to enjoy a story from the time. You can look at a story critically, but also understand that it was this way at the time and look past it a little bit to enjoy the story. That's just my take. It's so far in the past that glossing over a couple problematic things I don't think are that bad. Now I will just go through some of my live reaction notes and quotes that I wrote down because I think they're kind of funny. I liked that a man was described, he was sweetly coquettish with a fine figure. A lot of the ways that men were described in this story were like coquettish with a nice waist, incredibly handsome. Like, I like that. I respect that. I have never heard a man be called coquettish. Let's bring that back, ladies. Next is my favorite quote in the book. I will not give you any context at all. You're just going to have to live without it because it's just so funny on its own. And it says, I will crucify you by nailing you on it, and then I will parade you throughout the city because the pomegranate dish you cooked lacked pepper and tasted awful. Badr al-Din said, haven't you done enough? And all because the pomegranate dish lacked pepper? Like, I'm going to crucify you because your dish lacked pepper. Like, that was so funny to me. So those two things were definitely things I really enjoyed in the book. Those two are the only two, like, worth actually delving into because I think everything else I've pretty much covered. But that is my review of this book. Was weird. I believe I reviewed it 2.25 on Storygraph, which you should follow me, by the way. I have friends now on Storygraph. Oh my gosh. But I just thought this book was weird. And I think that that is okay. If you have any cultural context to give me that would make this story a little less odd, I am so for it. I want to learn more. I want to just have more education on this because I know there's context I'm lacking and I understand that. I'm not going to do recommendations on this book because I can't really think of anyone who I would think would enjoy it. I think that if you are to read a bunch of classics and you have this on your list, more power to you. I think that if you are invested in reading classics and you want to read this book, you should do it. But do I recommend it to anyone? Not really. That's just how I feel. So yeah, that's all I have to say in this video. If you liked it, if you liked this chaotic energy, like the video, comment down below a book that you have just found so weird and you didn't expect it to be weird, but it was just so weird. And if you like this chaotic energy, you want to see more of it, please subscribe. I release videos every other Thursday, and I would be so happy to have you around. So without further ado, this has been Moo. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.